Hello, and we'll be talking about loops again in this video. This time we'll be using PHP as my example. Last video was about Python. This we're going to cover the same types of loops, the while loop and the for loop and the for each loop. Okay, and we'll be using PHP so that we can just see a different syntax in these loops than we had seen in the previous one. So in my first loop, I'm going to set this variable x equal to 12, and then while x is greater than 0, I'm going to execute whatever is inside these two curly braces. So I'm going to decrement x, that's the opposite of increment, so x is going to go down by one point, go down by 1, and then I'm going to echo yes, and echo is PHP for output to the console. Generally, it's just going to output to the HTML output. So while this runs, x starts at 12, and then every time it goes through, it's going to minus 1, so it'll go to 11 and 10, and when it gets to 0, it stops right there. It will not execute a final time after having failed this check. It won't go through one more. It will break out immediately, and we will get, in this instance, it will cycle exactly 12 times. Normally, the first while loop that you look at, you probably think we're going to count up. We can, but we don't have to. We can count down. We can count by 2s. We can count by 10. We can count however we want. We don't even have to count. We can just say while some expression that equals true, and we do have to remember that inside that while loop, somehow we need to create the proper logic to eventually make this equal false. Right? If it never equals false, we'll stay in this loop forever. We've then created something called an infinite loop, and it will continue to run until our computer gets turned off or crashes, or depending on what's in there, we may be building up memory, and we can use up all the computer's memory and run out of memory and then crash. So don't create infinite loops. They're not really good for anyone. Okay, so make sure that somehow in here you make your condition equal false. That's the while loop. The do while loop, strictly speaking, we don't need one. If you need your loop to execute at least once, you do always have the option of priming the loop one time. That is copying whatever code is inside the body of the loop and put it right before the loop so that it happens once, and then when you're in your loop, you do it again. You can do that, or you can put all the body of your loop in a function. That'll save you some typing. You'll write it once, and then you call that function before the loop, and then you do the loop. And so now you've created a do while without actually having a do while. All right, so you can do that. You can also somehow fiddle with these numbers so that it always executes at least once. That may not always be a possibility for you, so you could prime the while loop beforehand. That's an option. So moving on to our next loop, we have a for loop, and this is a traditional C-based language. So we have our for loop where we set our iterator here. We created a variable, and in PHP, variables always start with a $. I is a traditional iterator. Starts the word iterator. So I is equal to 0, semicolon. This is the exit condition. When I becomes greater than 10, the loop will be over. And then this is the step right here, I++. Right? If I wanted to start at 10 and go down to 0, I put I minus minus, and I'd go down by 1. I can also put some sort of something else in there other than I++. I could put I plus 2. I can, if I wanted to count by 2s, I can do that as well. And then this loop is going to go through and it's going to execute. And this is the governing body of the loop. That's going to happen every time. We're going to get an I++ every time. But keep in mind that that variable I is accessible inside the loop. And right here I've accessed it. I'm going to output count and the number, the variable I, whatever its value is. So as I'm counting through, I'm going to output that number. So I is accessible, and that means that we have the option of I could set I equal to 10 and exit the loop early, or I could set I equal to 0 and restart the loop, or I could repeatedly set I equal to 0 and accidentally create an infinite loop. So if you're accessing and you're changing the value of I, you do need to be careful that you haven't accidentally created an infinite loop. And there may be an occasion where you say, oh, I haven't created an infinite loop, but in some rare circumstances where the starting value of one of your variables here exceeds your tests, perhaps, as a value that you didn't test for, and then maybe you did create an infinite loop under rare circumstances. So keep an eye on that, right? Make sure that you didn't accidentally create an infinite loop here, okay? And so this is the traditional for loop, and my next example is a for each that PHP has. So first I'm going to create an array, and I have 3 values. They're named values, not numbered values. So I have name equals Joseph, that's me. Value equals important, that's also me. And cookie equals 12. I try to never eat 12 cookies, but for this example, I'm going to have 12 cookies. And so that's my array, just those 3 values. And this for each loop is going to take my array and set each one of the items in the array temporarily. It will set them to this value called item, this variable item. And then inside the loop, I'm just going to echo the value of item each time, or I'm going to output that. So I can go through the loop and I can access item. Every time I access item in the loop, that variable item will be set to the next item in the array. Also keep in mind that technically inside this loop I have access to all the variables that are outside the loop. So I can potentially still access my array and perhaps add items to it or take items away and affect how long this loop may execute, or crash this loop and maybe crash my program. Okay, so be careful of that. Don't access and change things that should not to be accessed and changed. Okay, and that's the for each. It's going to go through an array, and this is actually going to access the items by it's going to copy the value, so it's going to access by value. It'll copy that value into this new variable item. And so if you change the value of item, you don't change the original array. We can put in the reference operator here, and I can access these by reference, and then I can directly change those. Okay, we have that choice, but that's for another lesson. All right, so that's the for each, the for loop, and the while loop, and to some extent the do while loop. All right, thanks for watching.